Hey, welcome. On today's show, are you or your company using shadow AI and you don't even know it? With employees facing increasing workloads and pressure to be efficient and the democratization of AI, are companies putting themselves at risk for losing a lot more than an employee when they simply walk away or quit? That's what we're going to be talking about today. It's all about shadow AI. This is the Daily AI Show. Today is January 28th, 2025, and I am currently joined by Jyunmi and Andy, and I'm Brian. So welcome, guys. This is a topic that I have been interested in talking about for quite some time. And for one reason or another, it just hasn't landed on our schedule because of other things going on. But I'm really sort of interested about this idea. And I'll tell you just sort of where my brain kicked off on this and how I think this could be a bigger deal than probably a lot of companies are currently thinking about. There's a lot to dive into here, from bring your own AI and other things I know you guys are going to bring to this. But here's the general fear I would have. So we know this, right? Everybody in our audience knows this. By the way, welcome to everybody in the audience. Employees are using AI. Maybe they're using something like a Copilot or a ChatGPT or a free tool or whatever. But it would be normal at this point for all sorts of companies, organizations to have employees using AI. Now, the question is, are they using that AI, those AI tools, as part of a top-down structure? Do their superiors know that they're using this AI? Probably in a lot of cases, yes, and in a lot of cases, no. For the companies, though, that don't know what their employees are doing, as I was saying in the intro, employees are facing pressure. And there is pressure to be more efficient, or simply you want to be more efficient because you don't want to work 40 hours and you don't want your employee to know that you can get it done in 30. You might have found yourself efficiencies. And this happened long before AI, but certainly AI has made it much easier to do. Now, as we're getting into 2025 and looking at agentic workflows, as we're starting to think about the ideas of having these assistants, like we were talking about yesterday, these interns, these artificial interns who can do work on my behalf alongside me, and we know this is coming. What happens? This is the big question for me. This is where this whole thing kicked off for me. What happens when a company doesn't really know what their employees are building, how they're solving problems, how they're becoming efficient? How is that directly or maybe indirectly affecting revenue for the company? And now it's bad enough when an employee with a lot of knowledge walks away or simply quits. There's a lot that goes on to. There's a lot of stats and data out there about what it truly costs a company to rehire and why it's better to retain employees. We know that. But now layer on this whole idea of AI, just simple AI workflows that can happen today, but also the agents of tomorrow. That's not just an employee walking away. That might be 20 employees walking away. And if the company doesn't know what's going on, that can have massive impacts on the business, revenue, and everything else. But it's in the shadows. That's the idea, right? You wouldn't actually know what's going on. So that's where I come at this from. I find it fascinating. But I'd love to hear your guys' initial thoughts on this. I put out a whole sort of dossier that we use in the background. I know you guys probably had a chance to look at that. What are your thoughts as you think about this idea of shadow AI?
I think your point about there being a deeper workflow process than is visible to the management that has been created by an employee. And if that employee were to leave, you're losing more than just the employee. You're losing some established workflow automation, perhaps, as an example, that has been contributing to your overall team productivity, but you didn't realize it if you weren't aware of that being implemented by an individual employee. So I think the obvious answer is, to have a transparent and open discussion about use of AI in everyone's positions and to encourage it, but also, put some guardrails around that in order to make sure that the right tools are being used and it's being done in a way that isn't introducing so-called hallucinations or just errors into processes that otherwise would have been caught by someone who was paying more attention, shall we say, to their own deliberate work, process.
Yeah, and I'll take a second to address the other side of things. Everyone who's worked in a medium, large business has to deal with an IT department, and sometimes not the favorite of everybody. But mainly their job is to make sure everything runs smoothly. So a lot of this comes down to questions of compliance and security, right?
Mhm.
Don't necessarily want someone bringing in an unknown variable into your network. So just we'll talk. I'll approach it from the shadow IT kind of side of things. Um, I can tell you firsthand, people from the IT department don't like it when people just like, oh yeah, I brought my home laptop and I plugged it into the network. It's like, okay, hold on. Why are you trying to bring in these devices? Why are you trying to load this software? And that's why these arduous processes are created to submit what you want added to the network or what you wanted to add to systems, and so that it can be properly audited and vetted and things like that. um, but the main goal is to make sure that something unwanted isn't introduced to the network, because a lot of these things on the compliance side can be dangerous, not only to the network but data leaks, breaches, and those kinds of things. And nobody wants to deal with those because they're a real pain uh, to get rid of and have to process and notification, and then if there's even fines and things like that attached to it. But I won't go too deep down that rabbit hole. But essentially, why I bring it up is why a company might have a reactionary viewpoint on AI and have just put the kibosh on it and just said, no, we don't want to deal with it yet. But this is not a sustainable goal, right? This is not something that is good for the company overall. And I think we'll go into a little more detail on that. So speaking about the shadow AI point of it, is people are going to their bring the I think you called it
BYOAI.
AI, yeah.
Yeah,
Bring
it's got a
their own
good ring to it.
right. And as we see more AI agents develop and become more personalized and running through for your own personal processes, that's going to include how you interact with your work, right, or your employer or anything like that. So that's going to become more and more prevalent and something that has to be addressed. Um, I think right now where we're at, both of you have mentioned like automations and building up tools used to make individual employees more efficient and get their work done, and the leadership not necessarily understanding or even being aware of that this is being implemented. So I think there's a larger conversation, a communications conversation that needs to happen with that. Now, normally within department, if we're talking about technical departments such as development or IT or whatnot, there are established processes to explore that, right? Hey, like in software development, you want to explore. You do your Scrum and you do your stand up meetings and things like that, to where it's like what's worked and what's not worked. Oh, hey, I made this thing. Oh, you did you? And there's at least some communication on that level. So I think those kinds of elements may be part of addressing how to implement various AI, but at the base level comes the education and the literacy part, right? So we need to everybody in the organization needs to understand that this is a thing, and you need to be at least aware of it. Whether you decide uh, you know, what your level of implementation is going to be, awareness and learning what is out there and how it affects your business. How does it touch upon your product? How does it touch upon your clients? How does it touch upon your internal processes? And because that's the way that we're bringing in AI into our business. Our business exists, right? But where is AI, or where could AI potentially be used by in this framework, our employees, for whatever their process is, and then identifying what is, are getting educated and literate on what is that best implementation? Is addressing the issue, sitting down with everyone and talking about it and go, okay, first amnesty, it's like, we understand it's been out there, and then recognizing the processes. I think yesterday I talked about one of the, the hot AI skills, or the hot skills regarding AI is understanding your processes, down to the nitty gritty. Because by doing that, you can recognize where there's any gaps that you either need to fill in, or in this case, any gaps in recognizing what is being used.
So Andy, you worked at and by the way, as you were saying that, I brought up a comment from, I'm going to say Chidi. I hope I'm saying your name right. I apologize if I'm not. You can correct me in the comments, but thank you for the comment. What I see is there is a lack of AI literacy with many small, medium-sized businesses, which is exactly what you're saying, Jyunmi. Now, Andy, what I'd be curious to hear from you about, because what I always love when you talk about Fit Aid and Life Aid, but also not just them. I know that's just one of many companies you work for, but because you're in the executive suite, Andy, I know I always learn a lot. And so I want to know from your thought process on this, knowing what you know today, knowing what you know is coming in the future with AI agents, how do you go about top down? You use the word encouragement, I believe, of doing this, because in our show notes, one of the things I love that came out of it is shadow AI is not inherently good or bad. Its impact depends entirely on how it's managed or mismanaged. Ignoring it is almost certainly the worst approach, while proactive and strategic engagement can unlock significant benefits. So, okay, you have a company the size of Fit Aid. I don't know how many employees that was or is currently, but when you were working there, and you get the knowledge, Andy, that there's definitely efficiencies being created with AI, right? People have taken it upon themselves and they're doing amazing things. How do you wrangle that? How do you both encourage while also putting a structure around that from the top down in order to sort of protect, and then also for the things that Jyunmi was saying?
So Life Aid beverage company had about 75 employees. It ranged up to 100 during certain periods of time, but it stabilized around there. It might have been reduced since I left 3 years ago. I would be, in the context of encouragement, I have some skepticism that there is even today any widespread use of AI outside of possibly in the marketing function, where they're probably using ChatGPT to do content generation that's ultimately edited by humans and prepared for both social media posts and also for the sort of the composition of advertising that's placed elsewhere in print and otherwise. I had a conversation recently with one of my colleagues in the sort of the data analysis and systems management side of things, and I was saying, hey, what do you do with AI? Well, not very much. I just don't really have time to do that. So there's a lot of friction in the form of personal, let's call it inertia, around investing the time and effort personally to use AI. So I would be on the side of, I hope it's a problem that there's shadow AI in my company. And I hope that they're doing it, and I want to find out who is doing it, and I want to try to use that as kindling for other people using it by bringing those examples where it's actually producing something effectively, to the attention of everybody else, and saying, here's what this person did, and maybe start to think about, no rush, but think about and talk to the head of project management, who's also managing IT. Talk to him about, what tools, that he might recommend, and then talk to me about it. I'm very interested as a senior manager who has some technical expertise. I want to be involved in understanding how you're employing it. I'll point out a side note, which is, if you do that, and even if you don't do that, if management isn't actively involved in encouragement of use of AI, then wherever and whenever AI is used and developed during work hours on your platforms, whether that's your company laptop or wherever else, technically speaking, that's company intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's not just something that is a sort of a personal tool that you happen to be using. If you did a make automation, for example, to streamline and eliminate kind of repetitive work that you had to do, well, that's something that the company should own. And I'm not talking about it in a grabbing kind of way. I want to retain the value that was created by my employee in advancing efficiency and productivity. And so I want to be aware of those things. So the first thing is transparency. It's got to be received positively. And I like the overall idea in this context that we're talking about today of curating and publishing a set of tools by the particular kind of application that you recommend as possible points of exploration for how you could use them in your work. There are lots of videos that come out on social media. Somebody saying, here's my best 10 tools for business in 2025. And they're pretty good. They align pretty well with what I would recommend. So start there, get a list, talk about it internally, and start to talk to your company about that. And that's I guess step one in eliminating the risks of shadow AI is bringing it out of the shadows.
Yeah. I wanted to just build upon one of the points you were making, and essentially where your point about someone building out like an automation or whatnot for the company. And that just speaks to the institutional memory. And I've always found that this is always a gap, no matter who I work with or work for. Institutional memory or understanding those processes, having it documented, being able to transfer that knowledge from essentially one generation to the next has always been an issue, especially the larger the organization. So I think that's a great opportunity for both AI to help and to highlight the importance of trying to eliminate that shadow AI issue.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys, and Andy, I think in a pure level, I absolutely agree with the transparency side, right? I want to work. I do actually work for a company, but I want to work for a company that obviously promotes this. However, I'm not saying I'm in this particular position, but earlier in my career, I might have felt differently. In my 20s, I might have felt differently, and that's to say, hey, maybe I do have a passion for AI, and I am building a few things on the side. Maybe because I like doing it. Maybe I do it at 6 or 7 p.m. at night. Maybe I am doing it during work hours. And to your point, that should be intellectual property. Regardless, I'm creating efficiencies. I'm creating workflows. I'm in Make. I'm doing a few things. If it's not handled correctly from the top down, and you don't already have a corporate culture of trust that comes from the top down on other topics, whether that's in HR or other places, I think what you're really going to run at is people who are just going to hem up, and they're never going to admit that they've created these things out of fear of losing their potential job. Now, there also could be fear, for your point, Jimmy, about they potentially used an AI maybe where they shouldn't have, and there's fear of loss of job because they broke the rules, whether those rules are defined or not for AI. But even outside of that, let's even say there was no intellectual property, there's no data, there's no HIPAA breaks or anything like that. They were just simply using a ChatGPT to help them create content better. Or, you said marketing, Andy, but obviously having worked in sales, I know it's being used deeply in sales. The reason I know that is the vast majority of people who sign up for my courses in sales do not use their corporate email. They use their Gmail or their personal email. We see it all the time. So they're not doing it through their company. They're doing it on the side because, hey, look, in sales, it's about commission stuff, and you might get a competitive advantage. So my point is, unless you work for a kind of company where you already trust the company and you feel like the leadership is there, I don't see a world where people are going to feel really great about telling you, Andy, or telling you, Jimmy, if you're up the chain from me and saying, hey, look what I built, it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of ways that could go wrong for me personally. Sure, I might get a pat on the back, and I might get somebody who says, like an Andy, who says, that's really interesting. How did you create that? Do you think we could use this in other departments? I think I heard Sally was also building something like this. You guys should get together. Let's put time on the calendar so we can look at how you approach the problem and how it did. Maybe we can come with one solid AI. I mean, that sounds amazing. What I think is going to happen more is the literacy is going to be missing from the upper ups. They're not going to know what was created. There's going to be a knee-jerk reaction, and that could cause a ripple effect well beyond just that employee. That could shut down everybody being able to use an AI tool or whatever. So there's a lot of downside and a lot of for a personal employee, and I think a lot of upside for staying in the shadows. Because if I stay in the shadows and I don't tell you what's going on, I just get the efficiency gains. Nobody's the wiser. I'm doing my job and people are happy with me and I'm getting better at it. And my employer seems to be happy about that. Why should I tell you at all? And I'm just playing devil's advocate because I think that's going to happen a lot if it's not already happening a lot now.
Yeah, I think there are many companies that have a prohibition on the use of AI, and probably with the agreement of the employees who didn't want to have to invest the considerable effort necessary to become proficient with it. And you know, there's a kind of protectionism that's involved there. Like we honor you as employees to do your job well. We don't want to introduce all the problems that AI introduces, and we want to lock that down. So using AI here, and this happened in the education market as well. Like a number of universities said, look, you're not allowed to use AI at our university. That didn't last very long. Why? Because it's very hard to control at the individual level. And as you just pointed out, Brian, people are going to use it if they have the skills, and it's going to make them a better employee. There's no doubt about that, right? Even just the context and familiarization with the full range of possibilities that's generated by a response from ChatGPT or other is informative, and it gives you a better, broader picture of what you need to be doing when you address a certain task. So yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that you're not going to be able to prevent individuals from using AI. There are too many free tools out there, and they will be using it. And so, avoiding any kind of sort of pushback and instead surfacing and resurfacing and encouraging conversation around AI in the workplace is the enlightened way, in my view, of managing this potentially very disruptive and intrusive inclusion of intelligence in the workplace. We can't resist intelligence at some level.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, I think you made the perfect point in education, right? Go ahead, tell the students they can't use ChatGPT. I'm not sure how far that'll get you, but go ahead, make the proclamation that it's absolutely banned at schools. You may have even made it worse because it's going to bring it into the news cycle, right?
Yeah, because all the people who weren't using it are going to go, "Oh, yeah, what's that?
What is the thing that I can't use?" Tell me specifically the thing you just said I'm not allowed to use, because it's just human nature, right? Well, now I definitely want to go use that thing. I didn't even know I could use that thing. I wasn't even interested in it. But now you're saying I can't do it. So now I really want to do it. I always joke with my daughter, if I'm 3 seconds ahead of my daughter going to do something in the house, and I have to be careful, right? It could be a shower. It could be, she's 14 now. That's not really an issue. I'm not reminding her. But, a couple years ago, you'd be like, it's getting late. You're watching the time click. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. And I go, Hey, Sophie, were you going to take a shower tonight? I was just about to go up to take a shower. I was literally walking up the stairs. But now that you've told me to take a shower, the last thing I want to do is take a shower. And she would get on my case about it, jokingly, right? And so I would have a laugh with her, and I go, I waited as long as I could to say something, but clearly I was 3 seconds too early, and it's just that father-daughter dynamic or whatever. But that's human nature to like immediately push back against the people who are saying you can't do something. So yeah, it has like a weird negative impact when you say don't use this. My wife works in government. You better believe they have all sorts of reasons and rules for that and stuff. But I always say it's like telling a kid not to use a calculator to do math. There's a new tool out there. It's called AI. It does a lot of amazing things, and it can help you with your homework. And the other example I'll give is I just recently reached out to my neighborhood, of which there's 600 plus houses in the neighborhood. So it's a fairly large neighborhood. with mini neighborhoods within it. It's one of those. Anyway, I like to give back. I like to teach. I enjoy it. And so I said, I'm just curious. On Sunday morning on a Facebook post inside the Facebook group, said, is anybody interested in learning about this stuff, ABC? And I will tell you, I got like 60 or 70 different comments back on that Facebook group post of, I'd be interested in this. I'd be interested in this. You know, I have a kid in school. I'm worried about X, Y, and Z. I'm a professor. I'm a teacher, and I don't know how to interact and work. And that wasn't even what I was intending to I was basic ChatGPT and basic AI, like generative AI stuff, just to get people educated on the literacy side. But it was amazing to watch all these comments come back. People are aware. It's just, how do you get them over the hump of being fearful of AI to a point where they go, okay, I see the positive impacts for me and my business. But I don't know, I go back to how do you communicate that correctly? Where does that start? Because if it's coming from the ground up, you have problems. I mean, it could be a good thing. Like you said, Andy, I hope it's happening. That means my company is effectively getting better. But my follow-up to that is, but if it's happening and you don't know, what happens when it leaves? Because there's a good chance it's not being built on company computers. In fact, I would say in a lot of cases, I know tons of people because they work from home. So they have a separate laptop that has nothing to do with their work laptop. And that's where they run the stuff they need to do with AI. The business is of none the wiser. So how do you get them to use the company's Make account or the company's Canva account or create a ChatGPT account and convince the company to pay $30 a month per head instead of $25?
Yeah, I think that comes down to, and, you know, broken down in bits and elements so far of how we would approach that. And step one is addressing the issue. And that can be broken down into that educational or literacy component. And if your company, the first step is in that addressing is to just recognize, hey, we haven't either had a clear policy on this, or we have said no at up to this point, but now we're saying it's fine. You're pardoned. You've got amnesty for anything that you might have done. We want to address this issue, or we want to address how we can properly implement. And so that, I believe, that first step really opens up the conversation with your employees. Is like you had mentioned earlier, is they're as long as they're not afraid that this is going to negatively impact them, whether they have been using it or haven't been using it up to this point, that's going to allow an easier basis for communication. So that's probably step one, as I see it.
Yeah, it's a good
I
point.
want to touch on sales, particularly as a function. Sales depends a lot on personality and interpersonal skill. And I want to make a distinction here, which you're I'm certain very familiar with, between inside sales doing outbound calling and people who are in field sales who are actually going face to face with customers in the field. And that's particularly in the history of Life Aid Beverage Company. You have people who have to go out and visit the retail distribution points, and those field sales people are walking in talking to store managers. So just for history, I tried when I was there to get them to use a CRM system just to manage the incredible number of touch points that were out there and provide some transparency to field sales management about what was going on there. And they did not like that. They did not want to have to use those systems, Salesforce or other, to do that. That's field sales. Their effectiveness is more about, scheduling their routes and making personal appeals to interpersonal connection with the managers who are going to make decisions on the floor about their product and where it's placed and so on. And so there's not a lot of automation that can be done there, although route management and that sort of thing, we were successful in implementing a tool for that so that they could plan their day really well. But in terms of reporting, the sort of the rote stuff that has to go feeding up to management. That was not interesting to them. Now, on the inside, outbound kind of work where you're cold calling and or cold emailing people, Brian, I've watched you develop an incredible array of tools that, sales teams can use to really improve their effectiveness in getting the initial engagements and managing those initial engagements with a high degree of automation. And that's very exciting. But I'm saying that there's these differences by department, and there's going to be certain components of your company that have an inherent disdain and or disinterest in using AI in any way, whatever, because that's not what has worked for them before. Right. And they've developed a set of skills over their lifetime in that function that they're going to employ, and trying to figure out a way that AI helps those may not work. So there's going to be places, though, where automation and AI, generative AI specifically, will help dramatically. And we've seen that that's happening in the automation of customer service. We've seen it in marketing, content generation, and we've also seen it in sales. I call it sales management of initial lead contact and appointment generation. All of those pieces working really well. But there are other parts of the company that they're going to trundle along, and I'm on the side of believing that there are very, very few as a percentage of the total companies, small and medium businesses at least. At the enterprise level, there's better infrastructure in order to try to implement something in the way of AI automation and workflow management. But on small and medium businesses, I doubt that there are many that are using it effectively. Carl would be a great commentator on that.
I think effectively is the key word there, right? Using it effectively is a little bit different, really. And we know you could easily have tried to implement a solution 1 year ago today and failed. And today it may actually be a home run. It's like we see that all the time. And so the other problem is, Jyunmi, you talk to this because you're more on the IT side of it. The way I look and remember IT is we would say the whole company would come together and, well, I've worked for companies where this has happened with IT. Hey, we think this new, because CRMs are being talked about in the channel, in the comments. We think we want to move from Salesforce to HubSpot, or even maybe like a smaller CRM to Salesforce, which would be a significant leap in cost and complexity and things like that. And then they would do this somebody in the company would do a whole evaluation. Somebody would be tasked with that. And there might be a quick team that goes about figuring out whether that's going to be the right move for the company. But Jyunmi, that to me, when it was like traditional tech, that might happen once or twice a year where there was conversations. What do you do today when the AI from 6 months ago and that deep evaluation you did for your company may be irrelevant? Like, how do you handle that? Does there just need to be a team at these companies that is tasked with always looking at new AI developments and having a systematic process in place for reevaluating things that were not a solution 6 months ago? Because you almost have to, I mean, geez, we talk about it 5 days a week and we miss stuff all the time. So what do you do if you're a company other than watch this show? Clearly watch this show. Step one, we all know, like and subscribe to the Daily AI Show. If you're a leader at your company, if you're not, this is step one. But after that, Jyunmi, what do you do?
Well, that you identified what essentially what a change agent or a change leader or a transformative leader or department would cover, right? This goes beyond just, oh, we've decided to do X. Now this needs to be implemented and this needs to be disseminated and things like that. This is that particular role of identifying tools that are needed is usually done by someone, usually your IT department. It's usually whoever your architect is, whether that be head of IT, directorship, or whatnot, because their job is to communicate and have crosstalk between various departments. so that their heads talk to them and say, hey, we want to implement this, or we want to do X, Y, or Z. Now, a lot of the times it does get tangled in the weeds, where it's, oh, hey, we think this would be a really cool small thing. And then you put in a request, then it gets identified, audited, oh, okay, cool, we'll implement it. And that kind of leads to a lot of bloat, because there isn't some clearly defined mission or goal or things like that. Now, companies that I've worked for in the past, they would title that under special projects. Essentially, someone who's there to spin up various business operations from the technical side and things like that. This is a job that I've done before, but it does require a lot of active communication with various departments, and that whole job is to identify those things. I think it is far more important even today, because of what you pointed out. AI changes that much more quickly, right? And being kept abreast of those changes and how that might be implemented, or what's important to the company as a whole, that requires quicker turnaround. That's going to require more attention spent. So yes, there might be a larger department that gets built out of that, or a team, right? A cross-departmental team that's built just from a responsibility side of thing. I'm not necessarily saying more people on it, but that, to identify that is a factor, and then that's even more important now. And the normal cycle of waiting for the quarter before to put in your finalizations for budget requests to implement for the next fiscal year and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
that's much too long now.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to build for that. You have to address that in your from the financial or the budgetary needs at that point.
And
but this is all part.
I was just going to say, it's a good point, Jimmy, because I wasn't even thinking that, but you just keyed me on this. You're talking about doing it like quarterly and talking about the financial impact. Not only could the model now be capable due to multimodal or things that weren't capable before, just because there was improvements to a custom GPT, it also could be significantly cheaper to run that solution. So if you're looking at it purely as a budgetary, and even looking at it on a quarter by quarter basis, you could be way off 1 to 2 quarters later if you're not taking this on, which brings up the question to me, like, Jimmy, is this the role of the IT director at a larger company? I'm saying 500 employees or something like that. This is not traditionally what IT would handle. And I think there's a fair argument to say that AI doesn't necessarily belong under IT. There's a fair argument for that. I guess in the future, we might have AI directors, right, whose entire role is to ensure this keeps running smoothly and does exactly what you're talking about, and you and me and Andy are talking about. But right now, those roles aren't really well defined. They're not. I'm sure there's businesses that are knocking out of the park, but I don't hear a lot of those stories. So this is probably going to fall into an IT director's, a CIO's lap, maybe even a managerial lap, depending on the size of the company. What do you do when now all of a sudden you're being tasked with also making sure your company is the compliance, the ethicals, the data silos, the IT deployments, all the stuff that has to go underneath IT. But now somebody's like, oh yeah, we also need you to manage and maintain and handle the AI new solutions. To me, that's an unfair ask and probably very stressful right now for IT leaders.
Yeah.
One of the main objectives of the IT function is to control access and manage the permissions architecture that you're using to make it so that the person in HR can't go into the financial management system ERP and mess around in there, right? So there's access rules and so on. I want to just play a little thought experiment here. Whereas let's say that there is a separate from IT approach to AI, and it takes advantage of the new operator type ability to run an AI that's going to operate from the workstation of one of your employees, right? It can only do what that workstation can do. So the permissions architecture is no longer an issue, although we have seen examples in news about AI of ways that AIs can work their way around problems like that. You give it an objective and it might be able to hack its way around some obstacles that it's confronting. The current version of Operator, which is just looking at your screen, I don't think has the ability to do that. But and so that makes it a little safer. So I can see there being a decision by some other, like at the CIO level, that, okay, the IT and networking folks who have to, maintain information security and access permissions and all of that, we're going to allow anybody who already has those things in place to use an AI operator to, in effect, automate with natural language instructions a series of steps that are already possible to be performed by them on their computer. So that could be the beginning of this direction, which is, hey, AI is different from IT. It's related, obviously, because it's a system, but it can be run because it's really just, and this is the difference here, instead of the IT and information technology functions developing AI for the employees use AI to advance and make their personal work more efficient by multiplexing their capabilities, as Carl demonstrated in his demonstrations of Operator, right? Multiple tabs working on different tasks while he's doing some other task, but overseeing all of those things. I think that's a great vision for how AI would find its way into the workplace, because it doesn't require a lot of prompt engineering. It's just, hey, this is the thing I want you to do. It's a simple task. I want you to open up this, application Word, and I want you to generate this, and then give it to the other, function over here. And I think that's a good direction. Safer.
Yeah. I think when it comes to the management and comes to the architecture and the building out of that implementation, the process, I could see there's enough importance and there's enough work to be done where you would have a sub-department or a side department. Definitely it would be the CIO or CAIO would be the ultimate, if you're doing a traditional hierarchical system, they'd have to be in charge of that overall. The issue, I think, or the rough spots would be so many of these tools and technology are going to have multiple touch points. So there's going to be a lot of cross-departmental interaction, and I think that alone may be enough to have the separate or the task group, right, to take care of that. But ultimately, I can tell you, just from the compliances side, that's going to be we want to make sure X, Y, and Z, 1, 2, and 3, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted and things like that for implementation. And that's definitely going to at least bring in that side of things for IT and whatnot. So it may not be a clear department, like there's a clear difference between like marketing and customer service, or sales and marketing and things like that. So there may not be too siloed in that case, and that might be a reality that just needs to be addressed. There's going to be a lot of touch points between departments and between employees for this.
Yeah, I'm curious about whether it will. There will be companies that give permission to their employees to use Operator, right? That's an interesting experiment. What can go wrong with that is the question. And there's lots of things I assume can go wrong, but it's so new, and the design of that system, which is basically just something working in your workspace on the desktop. That's a different model than having a free roaming AI agent out there on the web. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an interesting one. And I think I'd be inclined to give that permission even if there are some risks, let's stumble into those. Like, what are the problems? If either you guys have some ideas on what would happen if I let an operator operate an employee's workstation?
Well, for me, it's well, right now, operator is implemented from a third party into my network. So unless I had a fully localized version, there's all kinds of issues, right? As soon as data is going in or out of your network, that opens up a whole can of worms. So I would have to have that system set up to where there's enough compliances and security that I understand step by step what is available there and how's that set up. And these are issues that are addressed currently by implementing cloud services, right? And how your data is moved from one place to another, and where
my assumption is, by the way, that OpenAI enterprise version is planning for the implementation of operator in that context, and they're having to solve those problems.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good. I was just going to say really quick, Jimmy. I think this is a good plug, if you will. Not necessarily for us, although, obviously we know, the three of us know that we have the daily AI strategies, and we've worked with companies from a consulting side of the house for what we do, because we have people that reach out to us and ask us for help. And so we've been able to do that in some cases. But this is actually a decent plug for consulting in general. And here's my reason why. You talked about conversation across departments. I don't care how good you are at deploying something like this. You're going to get people who are very defensive about their jobs and also shut off to AI for a variety of very human reasons. And I'm not judging people for having those reasons. Sometimes, though, it can be really helpful to have an outside company who's not in the weeds. They're able to look at that, forest for the trees. They're able to take that 10,000-foot view and dig into each individual departments with an expertise in AI, and look and say, like, well, you're missing this because you're too close, or you don't understand how this could help this organization, or even worse, this department has already built a solution and you're not even aware of it, but we've uncovered this. So it can be really helpful. And I'm not saying every company has the ability or the need necessarily, but one thing to definitely think about is how having that outside vision, that outside viewpoint can be really, really helpful for a company, because you're going to uncover things that maybe they just can't simply see. They're just too close. No different than if my wife and I are like in the house and we're raising my daughter, but I might have it, an in-law, my dad or somebody like that, say like, hey, I want to bring this up because I'm looking at it from this angle. Have you thought about this? Oh no, because we're here, we talk about it all day, versus having that outside perspective. So anyway, I just want to bring it up. I don't mean it as a plug. I hope nobody sees it, as a plug per se for, hey, come work with daily AI strategies. But it is what we do. It's what Carl does at 0 to 60.ai. And there's a really good reason for it. Obviously, I'm a consultant as well on the sales side of things, but I mean it more as like the discovery side. Somebody to go in and really look at these different departments. And if you're a company that's really thinking like, I don't know what the next best step is, you can try to build it in-house and grow what you need in-house. But also a consultancy or the right consultants can be a really, really big time and money saver for businesses. So I think that's part of this conversation. If you really are concerned about shadow AI, that might be something that you might want to consider. I don't know what you guys think, but just sort of where my brain goes with it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about the consulting side of things. Having an outside view, that's essentially the main reason to have the consultants. Is, hey, we're in the weeds on a day-to-day. We need an outside perspective just to give us, a different facet, a different clarity, things like that. And that can be, a short relationship or a long relationship that,
exactly
regards the situation.
It doesn't mean deploying Microsoft 365 Copilot to 400 employees, right? With 1-year licenses. That's not the solution. And if anything, we know that AI is probably the most powerful tool you can use in your business, and perhaps also one of the cheapest, which is a great place to be. I mean, somebody who's saying in the comments, and by the way, Gareth and Jude and Justin and everybody in the comments are awesome. CJ, I see you guys. Gwyn, everybody's doing amazing in the comments. Thank you for adding to the conversation. We're reading all of them. But somebody was saying, you know, some startup is listening to this conversation and licking their chops and going, I'm going to disrupt this. And we're going to build it with an understanding of AI from the ground up. And I think Greg, I think was talking about maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe it's about deconstructing the hierarchies that we currently have. And that could be a whole other show. Is AI disrupting the traditional model of how we build businesses and span of control and all those kind of things that go along with it? You know, and what does span of control look like if my span of control is me plus 20 agents? Is 20 too many? Should I only have 8? Because the span of control, at least from the way I always saw it from emergency management, was like 5 to 8. That was always the typical number. So it'll be interesting in the future, not for today's conversation, but interesting in the future to go, well, what's that optimal number of agents that every employee should have under their span of control? That's going to happen, right? It's an interesting conversation. I don't want to get off topic with this one. All right, we're sort of out of time. So last thoughts, guys. I mean, I love this conversation, by the way. You guys have definitely helped me, and thank you to everybody in the conference as well. But I find this so fascinating, and I just know businesses are going to run headlong into this if they're not already. The reality is, if it's shadow AI and it's in your business, it's already happening. It's just whether you know about it or not.
Yeah.
So last thoughts on from you guys on this topic. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll wrap up by just saying, from this framework, no matter if shadow AI exists or not exists within your own company, AI is important, right? Understanding it. So we say this over and over again, but get that literacy, get that education, so that you can then assess your company and step one, address. Beyond addressing, there's various implementations and there's building out that culture and all that kind of stuff. But I think addressing the concept as a whole is your most important step. And as a sub point of that, do offer the amnesty. You want your employees, if you're the leadership, you want your employees to be comfortable with discussing it, whether or not you have a pro or anti-AI stance in your company right now. Because without that communication, you're just not going to learn anything, and any kind of change or implementation one way or another is going to be difficult. So I think those are probably the key takeaways. And if you're on the employee side of things, this is an opportunity to make yourself the change agent. Bring that AI education and literacy to your leadership, saying, hey, this has been in the news. Everybody knows this has been in the news. This is not a topic that only a handful of people know about. So bringing it up if it's not discussed. And of course, have your 1 to 3 examples of, I have this idea. And that might just get the conversation going.
Yeah, but start with the conversation. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
I want to echo Gwyn's comment here at the end of the chat, which is, why bring in AI until it settles out? It's faster, but as soon as you bring it in, it changes. And so you're going to have these switching costs as you try to keep up with all of the changes. And there's a value in waiting, right? That's called the waiting equation. And if you wait longer, it may end up that you can implement something, very quickly that you would have spent way too much money and taken too much time and distraction earlier on in the time cycle. So those are things that management has to decide. I actually feel like companies that made major investments in early stage AI implementations probably spent a lot more money than they needed to in order to do that. And that if they waited just a little bit longer for the tools to mature, they could have done it more effectively. So that's an open question about whether you jump in now. And it takes me back to your point, Jyunmi, which is literacy is the key. Like, there has to be a conversation and a learning process underway.
Yeah, I don't remember it, but it's the conundrum of the building the rocket ship, right? if I wait 5 years, I might have better technology and outpace the rocket ship I sent 5 years ago. So do you wait or not? And I know there's a name for that, but that's exactly what you made me think of, Andy. And we've talked about that. Hey, CJ mentioned, I think just in the comments, which is a great pivot towards tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday, so it's going to be all the news we think is really important and valuable over the last 7 days. I think it was, I hope it was CJ, but if it wasn't, somebody was just mentioning NVIDIA lost 17% of their stock in 1 day. That comes from the great DeepSeek fallout. We even had the president saying the name DeepSeek. It is definitely impacted, and we've talked about it on the show. It'll be one of many news stories we are discussing tomorrow. What does that continued potential impact look like? Will the stocks rebound? We may have more information on that tomorrow or today. So we'll be talking about that, but not just that, not just DeepSeek. We're going to be talking about all the other popular and probably some, every week we talk about news stories that you haven't heard about before. Some of the really cool stuff that's coming around. And Jyunmi, I'm glad you're back with us because you always bring some really cool stories along the way that are just super, super, super interesting. Okay, that's it for today. We'll be back the rest of the week. Like I said, tomorrow's the news. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That always helps us out. You can go to thedailyishow.com and sign up for our newsletter there. That goes out every Sunday. It's free. It's extra information. If you like what we're doing here, you'll probably like the newsletter as well. So that's it, guys. We will see you again tomorrow. Thanks for the great conversations. Bye.
Aloha.